Kessner from Dhcd, as well as the fabulous VERP team. Elizabeth, Lark, and Gabby are all here with me. And Pam, I'd just like to open it up to you for some welcoming comments before we dive into the content of today's webinar.
Great. Thanks, Santa, very much. And thanks, everyone, for attending today's seminar. We're really excited to get the second year of the Virginia Eviction Reduction Pilot off the ground and running. And if you haven't already reviewed the guidelines and application, there are a few different twists to this particular application and things that we think that will really complement what we've already done so far with the first year of VERP funding, and are so pleased to see some folks that are currently pilot grantees, but also new faces and communities. So very eager to continue this work. Given how far we've come through this pandemic, it's been a learning experience, and VERP will continue to help us learn and identify some best practices as to how we can prevent households from being evicted altogether, and perhaps do some innovative things in communities across the Commonwealth. So with that, Santa, I'll turn it back to you, but thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, Pam. And just very quickly, if the VERP team can each introduce yourselves, and we'll start, let's do Lark, Elizabeth, and then Gabby. Just quickly, your name and your role on the pilot.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lark. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the eviction prevention planner. So I will be working a lot closely with Gabby Vasquez with the grantees. I see a lot of familiar faces, so hello. So yeah, good luck on your application.
Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Spate. I'm the Eviction Prevention Policy Analyst on the Eviction team. I deal mostly with the mid-year and end-year reports.
Hi, I'm Gabby Vasquez, and I am the Eviction Prevention Program Administrator. I work alongside Lark and help with a lot of technical assistance and things like that. But happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you all. And for those who I don't already know, my name is Santa Gori. I am the Associate Director of Eviction Prevention at Dhcd. And I currently direct both the statewide rent relief program as well as the Virginia Eviction Reduction Pilot. So we're going to jump into the content today. Just to level set on the background of the Virginia Eviction Reduction Pilot. And if someone can, Gabby, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide for me, please. So reducing evictions in Virginia has been one of Governor Northam's top priorities even before the pandemic hit. In large part due to the fact that Matthew Desmond's eviction lab revealed Virginia as being home to 5 of the top 10 highest evicting cities in the country. Governor Northam and his administration acted quickly and invested $3.3 million into VERP, the Virginia Eviction Reduction Pilot. We are about halfway through our first year of the VERP pilot, which is focused on stabilizing individual households, either through rent relief or by supporting them by removing other barriers that may be standing in the way of their housing stability. We will award up to another $3 million for a grant period that will cover the 2022 calendar year. And of that $3 million, we have set aside $250,000 to pilot a court navigator program that we'll talk more about in this presentation. So the goal of VERP is really to demonstrate what is needed in order to reduce evictions in Virginia. And we would like for this pilot to reveal not only the interventions that are necessary at a household by household level, but just as importantly at a system-wide level. We know that in many cases, it's not the fault of the household themselves, but perhaps the system that they find themselves interacting with. So we hope that our findings and our work with the VERP grantees will paint a clearer picture of what's needed at a system-wide level to make evictions in Virginia rare, and the impacts of them less permanent, and most importantly, the experience more humane for our most vulnerable neighbors. So that's the framework that one of the teams I lead is focused on with this pilot. When we cannot prevent a household from entering the court system, we want to divert them away from it whenever possible. I'm going to spend just a second on the difference between prevention and diversion. Prevention services are provided to the household before they have been issued an unlawful detainer. So before the court gets involved. And that could include short-term financial assistance, case management, or mediation, to name a few. And diversion services are offered after households are issued an unlawful detainer, the first step in the legal process of eviction. So examples of diversion activities could include assisting in the negotiation process in order to make a landlord and a tenant financially whole and debt-free. And if you know anything about evictions, you know the importance of legal aid. So that's another really important service to offer in our attempt to divert evictions after the legal process has already started. For this pilot, the eligible applicants, you see before you, local governments, nonprofits, planning district commission, public housing authorities. We often are asked whether or not institutions of higher learning can apply. They can if they do so in collaboration with a nonprofit or a local unit of government. And of course, a successful applicant will have a proven history of meeting the needs of low-income individuals, ideally through the provision of financial assistance and housing supports, but also with existing capacity to implement the systems coordination that we're really looking to build with this pilot. The requirements, so applicants must be registered in CAMS, and you'll learn more about the logistics of that later in the presentation. We'll be looking for relationships between all the partners involved, already clearly articulated at the very least through a letter of, we're calling it not a letter of support. We don't expect full MOUs to necessarily be developed, but a letter of commitment. We do allow sub-grantees, so that is allowable, but DHCD must be in receipt of those MOUs and approve of those partnerships before they are launched. And we cannot enter into a contract with any agency that has any outstanding audit findings, IRS findings, or DHCD monitoring findings, or any other related compliance issues. So just a few words about the design of our pilot program. We're gonna be looking for organizations that can, as I said, both do the intervention at the household by household level, as well as at a systems level. So we need a systems intervention that goes upstream and presents as sustainable. So on the financial assistance side, that can be rent for as long as the statewide rent relief program is available. We do want households who are eligible for RRP to be served through that program. But in the event that you have a household who is not eligible, or perhaps who has timed out, reached their lifetime limit in RRP, then VERP could be a good fit for them. If they don't meet those RRP qualifications for any reason, you can use VERP to pay rent. Really exciting part of VERP is that you can also use the financial assistance to, as I mentioned, provide assistance around anything that might be standing in the way of a household's housing stability. So you might have a mother who's been trying to choose between paying rent and paying for daycare. VERP can pay for daycare costs. VERP can pay for car repairs. VERP can pay for medical bills that may be mounting. We want to be able to go to the General Assembly and articulate to them all the things that might be standing in the way between a low or moderate income renter's housing stability and an eviction. So while we do that, while we intervene at a household by household level, we need to create a real system, right, of eviction prevention and diversion that doesn't yet exist. So we'll be looking for applicants who have partnerships with affordable housing developers, with the courts, with legal aid, any number of, we'll get to a full list of them in just a moment here. And we do require that applicants have a partnership with legal aid in order to offer that mediation between landlords and tenants. Just a few more words about our design. We'll be looking closely at the outreach efforts that you include in your applications. Too often we hear about well-intentioned programs that don't make their way to the people who need them most. And we're looking for program designs that don't put the burden of that work on the person who is in crisis, but rather on the organization with the means to get the word out in creative ways to the folks who need this help the most. And I mentioned the stakeholder engagement and systems coordination piece. That is going to be key. And we're also always looking for programs that include people with lived experience in the design and ongoing evaluation and revision of program design. People who are closest to the pain often have the most to teach us about solutions. So we will be looking for that. I mentioned that we're setting aside $250,000 for a court navigator pilot program. So I'll just say all of the court navigation program policies and procedures will need to be approved by Dhcd prior to implementing the program. And the program guidelines, which you all have there and are available on Dhcd's website, has more examples of what a court navigator pilot program might look like. But the bottom line is we want to increase communication between judges and the folks in community who are assisting tenants with preventing or diverting, well, in a court navigator situation, it would be diversion, so that tenants are aware of the resources available to them, including their legal rights. And we want to encourage mediation between tenants and landlords. We would love to see a Virginia where going to court is not the first course of action, but a last resort. Too often the courts are used as a collection agency for low and moderate income renters, and that has a permanent impact on their record and is not always necessary. So examples of what that work could look like are here on this slide, helping tenants understand the legal process that they are now engaged in, so what to expect when they get to the courtroom, making sure that tenants have connections and access to other kinds of assistance like a legal aid attorney. We know that Black women are most likely to experience an eviction, and in particular, Black women with children, as well as women who have experienced domestic violence. So I just want to name that as a really important partnership that we'll be looking for. And then, of course, there is the overwhelming, paperwork, all of the forms that are written in language that even I don't understand half of the time. So helping tenants complete that paperwork and make use of a system that is should be designed to divert them from a permanent, the scarlet E on their record that will never go away. And we'll be looking for existing partnerships between your organization and legal aid providers or courts before submitting your application for this funding opportunity. So eligible activities, we've talked about the housing financial assistance, the stabilization support services. That's financial assistance that can go to so many other things above and beyond rent. We also know that reaching out to landlords ahead of time is an important prevention activity. So making sure that landlords are aware of this opportunity in your community, building capacity across systems, and providing, one-on-one housing counseling or case management to households who need it. The diversion activities, again, are the activities that would be necessary once someone has already found themselves involved in the court system. And again, there's a reason why you're hearing this more than once. It's very important to us that we see organizations who are reaching out to the folks who need help the most, rather than putting on the onus on the folks who are already in crisis to find you. So we'll be looking for some, outside of the box outreach and engagement ideas, going above and beyond brochures and having information on your website. And then, of course, administrative expenses are also allowed. The next slide talks about our geographic targeting. So the dollars are available statewide. But applicants from these localities will be given a scoring preference because of their very high eviction rates and or the inclusion of them as priority areas by the General Assembly. So we just want to note that while we do encourage a regional approach, we will only be funding one grantee per locality. So the next slide is about VERP advisory committees, and you will be getting a copy of these slides. So I'm moving fast. Don't feel like you need to write them all down, but we will expect successful grantees to have a significant level of coordination with their advisory committee, and we want to see that advisory committee consist of this comprehensive list of representatives. And I want to just point out, one thing that's different here from VERP, the first VERP funding opportunity, was that we didn't require a representative of the district court to be on the advisory committee. So I want to draw your attention to that. We Another difference between this funding opportunity and the last one has to do with the local match. So we still are not requiring a match, but applications that do include either in-kind or cash match will receive a scoring preference. The difference this time is that local COVID or other emergency resources can count towards a local match. In the last funding commitment, we did not count them because we expected them to be more time limited than it is turning out that they are. And it's important to note that any match documentation needs to be provided as an attachment in the application in order to receive that scoring preference. On participant eligibility, so the household's eligibility, we will require you to use an eligibility form that is designed by Dhcd. That's another difference between this funding round and the last one. So we will be more prescriptive this time around on what the eligibility form needs to look like and how to identify who is most at risk. And then we'll also provide a template form that can be used in the attachment section if you want to use your own assessment tool, which is different from an eligibility tool, right? Eligibility would be before they enter into the program, and an assessment would take place once they are in your program. So we will also develop an assessment form, but if you choose to develop your own, it needs to include the factors that you see here on the slide. And the reason for all of these factors is the direct correlation between these elements and someone's likelihood of experiencing eviction. And although these are not in order, I will note that according to the RVA Eviction Labs data, here in Virginia, a person's race remains the #1 predictor, even after we hold steady for education and income. Someone's race remains the most likely predictor of them experiencing eviction. And as we've said, single mothers in particular are at risk along with their children. So yeah, this is a change. The original VERP funding opportunity allowed grantees to develop their own tools. And as I said, we'll be a bit more prescriptive this time around. When it comes to data collection and evaluation, we know that evictions happen because most often because people can't afford their rent, right? But the whole country lacks, and Virginia included in that, lacks a real-time understanding of where evictions are taking place and why. So in order to make the most informed recommendations, we need a lot more information. So we'll rely on grantees to work really closely with us to develop and implement an evaluation plan for your pilot. And we will be working with a third party to help evaluate the impact of your program, both quantitatively and qualitatively. And we expect grantees to participate with that evaluator in the collection of data, in interviews with folks who have participated in your program, etc. All reporting will be done in CAMS, and we will require a mid-year and an end-year report, and we will use those to assess the impact of your work and the overall effectiveness of our pilot, understanding that the purpose of this pilot is to better understand what the root causes of eviction in Virginia are, and what the systemic solutions that we can create together might be. It's a truly exciting opportunity to be a part of, so we're really grateful that so many of you are already expressing interest. With this, I'm going to turn it over to Lark Washington, who will get into some of the nuts and bolts of what the application process looks like.
Yes, hello. I'm going to overview the application process. And you may have seen, if you read over or glanced over the program guidelines, you'll see the questions there already. So the deadline for the application is November 15th at 11:59, and that's a Monday, so a few weeks away. And all applications must be submitted through CAMS. It's our grant management system, and it's an online system. So that's where it is. And applications will be reviewed as it is submitted. So we will review the applications after the deadline. So you access CAMS through the DHCD website. So, and it will be in the Access CAMS button will be in the upper right-hand corner. And then you would click Applications and Programs and then Apply. And then you select the Virginia Eviction Reduction Pilot, or VERP 2022 from the drop-down menu. And then click Go and Apply. So you must register in CAMS before an application can be started. So you could just go in CAMS to create your own like organization profile. And it is very important that the people assigned roles in that profile is updated. So if someone leaves, it's very important to make sure that's updated, because it takes a while on our side. To make the changes, we have to go to IT, and it becomes like very hard to do. So I just always advise applicants and grantees to make sure that contact information is updated. All work in CAMS should be frequently saved because after 55 minutes of inactivity, the user will be logged off, so you don't want to like lose all your work. So it is recommended that you use Word to work on your application, and you can just copy and paste in CAMS, so you know not all your narrative is gone. And Google Chrome is recommended in the browser. It's recommended to read the VERP program guidelines and application instructions prior to working on the application. So if you see that you know that it isn't a match, you didn't waste your time working on the application. So the text box response, the text box in the application only accommodates text responses, and the graphs, tables, charts, or any of those graphics, they can't be posted in the actual narrative section, but you can include that in a separate attachment. So that's what the project information looks like there. And you I mentioned like, oh yes, and then project budget. Oh yes, yeah, project information. So that's the part where you just need to make sure the contact information is updated. And this is the project budget is where you would actually create your budget. So since kind of broke down all the budget categories, we should also note, I think it's in the program guidelines, that coordination and initiatives and partnerships are part of that prevention bucket. So anything that has to do with after the unlawful detainer, that's the diversion bucket. So you all can kind of like craft your budget in there. And then also include other funding that you're using to bolster your program. And then there is the narrative question. I think there's about 6,000 characters per narrative question for each of the box. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, 6,000 characters, I should say. So yeah, so like I said before, please make sure to use Word. So, you know, just in case your CAMS profile becomes inactive, that you don't lose any work. And those are this is your attachment. So this is where you would post your graphics that you want to support your application. as well as your implementation timeline, your policies and procedures, and your intake form if you do not want to use the Dhcd version, as well as the eligibility form. So we'll have that for you, and you can, and that is optional for you all to use that if you want to use your own, but just making sure it has the standards that Cinta mentioned. And then also your MOUs, if they can be ready, but we understand that the deadline's coming up, so letters of commitment are fine for the application. And then showing the match documentation if match is included, as well as the advisory committee, so kind of naming who's on the committee and what role they are in, because we listed specific representatives we wanted in the committee, so that would be helpful as well. So the application status. So multiple users can work on the application, so that's great. And the application will be saved as complete, and you can work on this until the due date. So, and be sure to save CAMS as you work, save it on CAMS as you work on it. But so once you submit the application, the status will change from incomplete to pending, and that's when we will start evaluating the applications. So this is the evaluation criteria that we're using, and you'll notice that there's two criteria. So one criteria is without the Court Navigator program, and one is with. So in this round, we still included need, but the approach has become pretty important, and there's slightly heavier points for approach with grantees that don't use the Court Navigator pilot. And then there's capacity. So capacity is very stressed in this because it's involving a lot of parts, and we want to make sure that the grantees are ready to carry out a program like this. And this also, in the next slide, also includes the additional scoring preference points that Cinta mentioned before. I don't know if oh, there it is. So so partnerships with local government or housing authority would give you 5 preference points. Programs that have regional scope, so if you're serving more than one locality, that is a preference points. And programs that serve a priority area that was listed in the slides before, that will also have a preference point. And programs that serve more than one, so you'll get even more 10 preference points. So these are the technical CAMS questions. Like if you see like something that's not right, say if you keep saving and you're not seeing it updated, the CAMS has a special help desk option that you can contact, and they're very responsive. But I will say we do not recommend waiting until the last minute, because the CAMS help desk folks do work during normal office hours. So for any of the application questions in itself, you can reach out to Cinta, and that's her email right there, cinta.gorey@dhcd.virginia.gov, or any one of us as well. So that's all.
All right, so we're in the question portion. I'm going to start out just reading the questions in the chat for those who might be over the phone. The first question that we have is whether financial assistance needs to be a component. Do the funds for financial assistance come out of the grant award?
So yes, financial assistance does need to be a component, and it does come out of the grant award. And I would just add to that there is a little less of a focus on the financial assistance this time around than there was the first time around, mostly due to the fact that we have our RP. But we know that more and more people will continue to reach their 18-month limit with RRP or need financial assistance with something other than rent. So we want that to continue to be a part of the story that we tell through data that we collect. But it can't be just that household intervention. There needs to be a system level intervention as well.
Are there any restrictions on the type or source of funds for the match? Could an applicant use government resources as a local match?
Yes, you can use government sources for a match. We do not, this time around, we are not restricting the type or source of funds that can be used for the match. But remember that you do need to include documentation of that match as an attachment with your application, or you will not get the bonus points.
We have a question about the set aside for the Court Navigator program. Is DHCD's intent that the $250,000 set aside will be for one grant recipient's pilot program, or will it be split between several successful grant recipients?
So we are awarding up to $250,000 with that set aside. We will decide how to allocate that based on the applications that we receive. So it is possible that we could fund two, and if we did, obviously, if we did that with an equal split, that would leave each with $125,000, for example. But we know how much we've set aside for that, and we'll see what comes in from all of your great proposals before we commit to funding one or several.
And then for administrative costs, is there a cap on administrative budget items?
Yes, 10% of a total budget can go towards the administrative costs.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing with the administrative costs, and it mentions it in the program guidelines, and you'll see in the CAM's budget. Administrative costs are kind of like for the reporting, things like that. If you all need to hire someone to do like outreach or something like that, that would be considered program staff. So I do just want to make clear that, if you're hiring someone to do the actual direct assistance pieces, like help review applications, things like that, that would be under those line items. Administrative costs are just for things like the reporting, grant management, things like that. Another question that we have is, can MOUs with subrecipients also be in the form of a letter of commitment, or does that need to be a formal signed MOU?
At the time of application, we will accept a letter of commitment. Before an MOU is executed, we at DHCD would want to approve of that. But for application purposes, a letter of commitment works.
This question is from current VERP grantees. The mid-year report, is capacity measured by service delivery to target populations or volume of service delivery?
Charvela, that's a great question. I would answer that by saying both. We'll be looking at all of the metrics used for measurement with our current VERP grantees to assess them for another year of funding. Does anyone on the team have anything else to add with regard to that question?
I would just add, Charvela, and for any of our current VERP implementation or planning grantees, there is a question in the narrative questions that asks about your success to date with VERP 1.0 and how VERP 2.0 can improve. So, if for some reason, I don't know if you're asking this, like maybe if you're worried your volume isn't enough or something like that, you can explain like the impact that you're to date that it's made. So if you want to contextualize some of the numbers that are shown in the mid-year report, feel free to use the narrative question to do
that. Ditto, I agree.
We have a question about how many grants we plan to award.
So that will depend on the number and quality of applications that we receive. We currently have 4 VERP implementation grantees, and we have several more planning grantees, 3, 4, 5, 6 planning grantees, I believe. What I can tell you is that we will award the full $3 million, and how many awards that turns out to be depends on the kind of asks that we receive.
Is it permissible to be a subgrantee and or partner for more than one grant application across a range of localities? So if one organization wants to be a subgrantee for 2 applications, is that allowed?
I think that that's allowable if it's a subgrantee. I'm seeing my team nod their heads.
Yes, we will. Oh, sorry, Senta. I was going to say we are just going to deal with one grantee, but the grantee that's awarded will be the one that's dealing with the subgrantee.
I think what that question brings to mind for me is, as the applicant, thinking about the capacity of your subgrantees and choosing one that you believe has the ability to work across more than one program. But yes, it is permissible as a subgrantee to serve more than one locality.
Would a court navigator grant need to include all the other activities as well? So could someone just apply for court navigator funding?
I had not imagined that scenario. Elizabeth, Lark, or Gabby, it was always intended to be paired with the bigger picture, the financial assistance and system intervention, as well as, so the court navigator is like an add-on.
What I would probably recommend is if you're an organization that would want to spearhead a court navigator grant, it would, because the focus of this is system coordination, so it might make more sense to be a subgrantee for someone who has that kind of holistic approach. It's okay if the main applicant might not have that legal background or have that expertise, so it might be more beneficial to be a subgrantee in someone's application.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, be a subgrantee.
So that was everything in the chat. If others have questions that they want to share or any follow-up, they can do so.
This is Charvela. Of course, I have another question because I always do. So one of the cool things about the first iteration of the pilot is how we were able to design it to meet our community's unique service delivery and cultures, et cetera, et cetera. And we've learned a lot through this first iteration, the retreat, hearing from other grantees and the staff about some things. So we have walked away with some ideas about how to improve our current pilot. Is it appropriate for us to run those ideas by your staff as we're developing our applications?
Yes. And anyone is welcome to reach out to myself or anyone on our team to ask questions and run ideas past.
Yes, of course. I think this round we're trying to be more intentional about giving more guidelines. So yes, we will definitely work with you on trying to see what's feasible with the program. And we wanted to provide a list of examples of what partnership and initiatives can look like. But if it's another example that we didn't list, like that can be an option as well. So
We do have a question in the chat about the example between examples of program costs and indirect costs, and like what would fall under administrative services and what would be indirect.
I might need some help differentiating between administrative and indirect costs.
June, if you look at the program, well, Pam can also go. There is more explanation in the program guidelines, but Pam can also chime in.
Yeah, administrative costs are costs directly related to your administering the grant, right? So if you have used your finance director's time at 3%, you can charge off their time, keep time records. Some organizations have created an indirect fee, and as Elizabeth mentioned, it's explained in the grant guidelines how to do indirect costs. You can't do both. So, for example, if you figured indirect costs to operate a program, given this, whatever your budget is 5% of the overall budget, and that includes your finance director's salary, you can't also charge them off on the admin side. So it depends on how that is structured. And if you need more guidance after you get into the guidelines, reach out to the team. We've got some fiscal staff as well that could also provide some guidance to help you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to know more about the kinds of exceptions that Elizabeth had been mentioning earlier. So, right, like what would be direct, what could we conceivably sort of put under direct program costs that would, in other contexts, be considered administrative? So thank you for that.
Gotcha. Okay.
This is us leaving room for additional questions. Our team will still be here for 10 more minutes if necessary. Just a reminder, if you're on the phone, feel free to unmute yourself. You can press *6 to do that. You can also unmute yourself if you're joining by your computer. I see people are beginning to leave the meeting, and that is fine. Thank you all for joining us. And yeah, my team and I will stay here until everybody's gone. So if you've got a question that pops up, you still have time to ask it. But thank you all so much for your interest and what you've already shown to be your commitment to serving your neighbors. We appreciate it.
I just want to say thank y'all. My name is Jimmy Williams, Town of Coburn, Town Manager. Any information is good information, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to discuss something else in the near future.
Thank you, Jimmy. Nice to meet you today.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Y'all have a good day.
you.
Senta, we do have a question from Christine Jacobs on, is it accurate to say that all activities funded by the grant need to be completed within the 1-year window?
Yes.
And then there were 2. Do you all
Tara.
have any questions? Michelle and Tara? Oh, no.
Well, I think we can stop recording.